thank you for tuning in to my fourth podcast. As promised, this is going to be about the overtaxation, the big issue everybody is talking about. Most importantly, how we got to this point. The county really did not just wake up one morning and decide they were going to start taxing everybody to death, even though it kind of seems like it. There have been a lot of bad decisions and mismanagement that has led to this point. And as an insider that actually worked for the Jackson County Assessment Department during many of these years, I kind of had a front row seat for that. And so I'm going to go over how we got to this point and actually how I feel like, in addition to some other things, that we can actually improve things as well, with one main factor that seems to be overlooked, and that's responsibility. And I'm going to go over all that today, and I hope this is at least somewhat interesting and insightful. But without further delay, because this might be a little bit long, I will go ahead and get started. Okay, I know we're going back a little ways here, but bear with me here. So in the early 2000s, the assessor, Bob Boltley, was actually fired due to mainly issues with the assessment values. There were a lot of wrong bills mailed out. One thing I thought was interesting is his failure to accept responsibility was one thing. Catherine Shields was quoted as saying, and so I just found that a little bit interesting. But he was let go due to mainly the values and value issues, and as a result, the tax bills were incorrect. And there was a vacant period, and then Michael O'Flaherty actually filled in as the assessor from 03 to 07. And this was a great time for Jackson County because this is actually whenever I started. Kind of a joke there, but anyway. So in 2007, that is whenever Curtis Coons was hired as the assessor, and he would be the assessor the majority of the time that I was with Jackson County. Obviously, it would not take long. In 2009, we had a recession. Values were coming in pretty low, and as a result, the school districts actually sued Jackson County in what was a pretty memorable time in the assessment department overall. And I remember they had everybody come to the courthouse, and we all took a picture in front of the downtown courthouse. I guess that made us look very serious about our evaluations. But things were dropping pretty dramatically, especially trucks and SUVs, real estate, obviously. And so that prompted the lawsuit from the school districts. 2009 was the beginning of a very odd period in Jackson County, and you can argue that it really never ended after this. But as somebody from the inside, again, 2009, Jackson County hired what they called a business process manager. And where they got him from and all that goes beyond the scope of this video. But he was basically, or it appeared that he was hired to make some pretty important decisions along with the assessor, and oftentimes it seemed like his decisions were unpopular and they didn't always make any sense. And sometimes it was really hard to tell if he was the one in charge making all the decisions, or if it was the assessor, or what exactly was going on. There were even just in my small office that I was actually in, there were decisions that affected staff pretty badly, like raises and staffing issues. And so really this marked the beginning of, at least from what I can remember, of somebody really with no direct knowledge of what was going on making some pretty important decisions within the department. And you can tell that this obviously had a pretty big impact on things, and was really, this kind of was the beginning of the end, so to speak. It was just a downward spiral, honestly, from here. So now we go to March of 2010. a layoff happens in the assessment department, and this is a day that I will never forget. The shock that was felt throughout the department of those that were actually chosen for that layoff. I just can't stress that enough. Among those in the layoff was one person who was the assistant director of the real estate department. He had been a Jackson County employee since he had worked or since he had graduated from high school. And so, and he was very qualified to be in his position. And so that was the biggest shocker of all the layoffs, and the real estate department was definitely the heaviest hit. And so it was also said, again, not really communicated to us, but just through various people, that the choice in who was let go was not that of the assessor, but that of the business process manager that had been hired. And it was even said that there were several people upset about those that were chosen, but there was really nothing that could be done about it at that point. Take that for what you will, but I mean, there was a lot of background information and things that were said after the fact, but that hit the real estate department very, very hard. And that wouldn't even be the first layoff that they would be involved in, but this was really the first of many, and that kind of set the stage for everything else. More layoffs after that. In fact, the worst one would be in 2012, and this is another one that I will never forget about. And it was very stressful because we knew quite a ways in advance that it was happening, and this was the one that was due to a lack of state funding. Jackson County Assessment lost so many people in 2012. I remember it being said that they were trying to trim the staffing down to about 50%. I believe it ended up going from around 100 to 60. But they also offered a buyout. Many people were let go, and assessment was the only department involved in this layoff. And so there's that. And again, real estate was very, very hard hit in this one. And so you already, after 2010, you had people making decisions in real estate that you really had never had before, and probably people that shouldn't have been. And then in 2012, you lost even more people. And this was really just a brewing storm in real estate that you could kind of see coming from the inside. I mean, you knew things were in disarray already. You just didn't really know how the values were going. And so this kind of set the stage for what was about to happen, which is one of the worst years in Jackson County history, and that would be 2013. From an internal Jackson County perspective, I believe 2013 was the most traumatic year in recent memory. Curtis Coons offered his resignation. There were issues with the real estate values, and again, the issue was more so that the wrong people were doing things because of many of the reasons that I had mentioned previously. I mean, you have to remember, Curtis Coons was hired for Jackson County in 2007. Prior to that, he overseen the same exact processes in Cass County from 1996 through 2007. So did he just suddenly forget, how to run the department? I think it's probably an issue of where he might have put too much faith into some of the people that were doing things. But regardless, it wasn't really 100% or really at all his fault in some ways. But it was just a really bad year for Jackson County as they had to endure the embarrassment of the whole process, their assessor putting in their resignation, and it was something that they would never, ever allow to happen again. In addition to Curtis leaving, there were some that left with him, not directly with him, but left after he did. And one of those was our longtime system administrator, who was very good. He knew his job very well, had the benefit of being trained on the job before he really took over. And whenever he left, he did not do that for the future systems administrator. And so we went through a lot of system administrators in a very short amount of time, which obviously did not help the department either. And where this system administrator went to was Tyler Technologies. And that's not necessarily why there's that relationship there. There's always been a relationship there between Jackson County and Tyler Technologies for whatever reason. I used to have a bunch of pens from Tyler Technologies on my desk. I mean, they would always be advertising their sales and their software and services and things like that with Jackson County. So that was a regular thing. They've always had this relationship, but that made it better, definitely, to say, because he was actually working for Tyler, and then he was also a whatever you call it, I guess a consultant, and that will definitely be a popular word from this point forward. A consultant for Jackson County as well, and he had the knowledge where he was needed, definitely. He's a friend of mine, and I don't want to name drop him, but he, definitely, his help was needed. And so with that, also there were some new hires in the department, which didn't necessarily help things 100%. But after the massive 2012 layoff, it was a 2-year waiting period where the county could not rehire for those positions. And they did in 2014. They lobbied for a lot of new positions, and they got a lot of new people. The problem is with the, I guess you could call it the supervisors, the ones running the show, they didn't stay very long. And so there was always a huge turnover, and this still exists to this very day. Just go on the website anytime. It doesn't matter if you view this anytime now or in the future. It's probably going to be like that for quite a while. In the assessment department, the job listing, I mean, it's like a booklet. It's just ridiculous. And they don't view that as a problem. Kind of interesting. But 2014 was very, very bad in that who was running the show now because of all the layoffs and all the decisions that had been made. The assessor was gone, our system administrator was gone. There was really no direction, and Jackson County was sure as hell not going to let the same thing happen that happened in 2013 happen ever again. So what did they do? Meet Jackson County's very expensive insurance policy, John Ebert. He would actually be in charge of the real estate assessments from this point forward until he would be used as a scapegoat. But that's exactly what he was. He was Jackson County's insurance policy. Jackson County would no longer have to take the blame, and Jackson County also began, or maybe continued, but they began to really rev up the values. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe thinking that they were too low. I mean, there could be all kinds of reasons there that I can't really say for sure, but I do know that they really began their aggressive phase while they had this insurance policy. It was kind of a game of like, how high can we go without breaking the system, so to speak. And I'm sure that if you can look back in history, you can see that, I mean, there were pretty much increases all across the board whenever he was the consultant. And again, that will be a popular word from this point forward. But he was in charge of the real estate assessments, and he was a very expensive insurance policy, and he would be liable for everything. He would be the one that Jackson County would point to if anything were to go wrong. As they had learned in 2013, they did not want to have to ever go through that again, and they were willing to pay a pretty big price in order not to do so. Despite the fact that I did vehicle values, just the disastrous state that real estate was in, I was involved just as much in that by this time, and I attended a lot of meetings with John and the other real estate folks and just kind of listened in on some of the planning and things of that nature. And John was a advocate that we didn't necessarily need new software either, and that new software had been a topic for years, even before this, but he felt that we could utilize what we already had. And so that was likely a good thought as far as the county was concerned, because that would at least save money as far as the new software. But again, he was the insurance policy, and he would be going forward, and he was in charge of some very, very rough years in the real estate department where there was a lot of turnover. and it was again very aggressive. Okay, we all know where this is going. 2019, things get a little bit hectic again. The values go out, again, a very aggressive assessment. News starts covering it. People start kind of freaking out a little bit, and then there goes the insurance policy. It's his fault. Then there's a few news articles that kind of cover what he's been doing or not doing or whatever over the last several years. A couple weeks later, nobody really cares about that, but he has been the fall guy. He served his purpose. And now, 2019, everything is kind of back where it started again. You can kind of compare it to 2013. And so now they're trying to figure out how are we going to do this now. And even here is a quote from Curtis emphasizing the fact that it was a staffing issue with his department. And I would definitely agree with that. There was also some quotes about how the values were intentionally held lower. Now, while there might have been some areas that might have been on the low end, I don't think anything was ever intentionally held lower. But I mean, that could be a topic for another day. But then, so there's no scapegoat now. Jackson County has finally ridden their scapegoat, and so then 2021 comes around. So it has now been a lengthy, bloody battle between taxpayers and Jackson County. And so 2021 assessment comes around, the news starts saying that it's going to be hell on earth and that the values are going to be even higher, and people kind of start freaking out a little bit already. Now, there was just one problem with this. And what do you think that problem was? Well, actually, it's because they didn't have anybody that could take the blame. They were kind of in this in-between phase. They didn't have a consultant to take the blame. The assessor, who by this time, they did have a new assessor, but apparently she did not want to be involved in the blame process, as is the tradition of the county. So 2021, by all means, was a relatively low impact year, despite the forecasts for it being really bad. For the most part, everything was okay. It wasn't nearly as bad as forecasted. And I'm really surprised that nobody's pointed out the fact that, well, they didn't have anybody to really fall back on. So now we're going for 2023. And, you got to just picture what goes on inside these meetings, to be a fly on the wall for those. What is the one thing? I mean, because that Jackson County, and I'm sure, rightfully so, they're tired of going through this every single year, every other year, but it's really all year round for them because they're always doing the reassessments, getting ready for it. And so, how can they put an end to this? Because they've been paying an expensive consultant. They've spent a lot of money on the process. Nothing seems to be working. What is one thing that would fix it? New software, which has been talked about for over a decade. That really didn't surprise me. I attended so many new software meetings and even learned new software, but then it wouldn't be in the budget. I mean, that's not even really a big deal to me. But how do you actually fix this problem long term? You hire a company to do it. And who do you get? Tyler Technologies. It makes perfectly good sense. Now we have another fall person or fall company as it is this time. And so while it could end up going either way, 2023 is looking like an interesting year because now Jackson County is paying yet another insurance policy, but this time it's benefiting them in more ways than one because they are getting the software upgrade, and they're also getting the values done for them. I mean, talk about easy peasy. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And obviously they feel pretty strongly that Tyler Technologies can do the job and do the job adequately, and there could be a lot of appeals. There might not be. We don't really know what Tyler Technologies and what their values are going to be like. Now, the one problem is that they were outdoing it when the house market was pretty much at its peak. But that's the problem still that I have with Jackson County, because now they have that insurance policy again. They have that fall person or fall company. And I think that's the issue that has not been emphasized enough. Okay, so I'm not trying to pick on anybody here, but Jackson County does have an assessor or a director of assessment. And generally, that person is directly responsible for what happens when the tax bills go out. They oversee the process, that is their job. And so if something does go wrong, it is usually them that has to pay the price. That's how every other county in Missouri is, and that's how Jackson County always has been in years past. And whenever things do get a little bit hectic with the reassessment, she always is putting in quotes, defending the process, defending the increases. I mean, so she seems to have a stance on this, but she doesn't have any responsibility. And even in this article, she was quoted of saying if things were too low or undervalued so long, and that could be the case in some areas that maybe might not have gotten reassessed in quite a while, but it wasn't like that across the board. I mean, anybody could go and look at the values. And so I don't know why exactly that Jackson County currently keeps their assessor and all of their direct administration immune to everything that happens. Okay, I could probably take 20, 30 minutes just summing this up, but I'll try to make this quick. So, to sum this up, this is over a decade worth of nonsense that has happened and some really bad decisions, particularly 2009 and after is whenever everything started to kind of slide downhill, which set up which set the stage really for 2013 ultimately. Um, but there's so many issues that played a role in this and so many decisions. There's not one person that you can blame for this, really. And like one of my counterparts is blaming the county legislature for signing off, on the software things and all. I mean, none of that matters. Whenever you look at the big picture, it is nobody's fault. It does not matter what was going to happen. Jackson County was going to find a scapegoat one way or another, because that's how they operate now. And for whatever reason, because I mean, normally you try to keep the school districts and happy and getting their money. No, don't teacher layoffs. Everybody in education's happy, because that is a big deal, and no one's talking about that right now, which is really surprising. But then on the other side, you have the taxpayers, especially, the senior citizens, the ones that are on a very limited income, have no children in school. I hear that argument also, and that's the argument that you hear the most, or just, the average person, about their assessments. And again, that's a very strong argument too. For whatever reason, Jackson County, again, is playing a game of like, hi, how can we go sort of thing, where in general, you try to keep it in the middle. You try to keep everybody happy, which is impossible, but you try to keep as many people happy and everything functioning well as possible. But that theory just somehow went out the window, and I don't know why. So, again, multiple issues. Second issue is the county is not being held responsible for what they're doing. I mean, and I don't like seeing anybody getting fired whenever something goes wrong. I mean, I don't necessarily want that, but things seem to run differently whenever somebody within the county knew that their job was on the line whenever they were doing a process. And that's not the case anymore, and I don't know why that is. And in other counties, again, I've never personally visited every county in Missouri, but I have heard that every county in Missouri for the most part, has an elected assessor. In Jackson County, it's appointed, and it always has been for as long as I've known Jackson County anyway. One day that is going to change. I've been hearing that for a long time. For whatever reason, it has not changed yet. And so there will be a one day in Jackson County, the assessor will be elected, and regardless of how the values go, they will be responsible either with their job or mainly through the election process. But right now, they're kind of immune to all of that, and that's unfortunate that no one really has that responsibility, and they're really taking advantage of that, I feel like. And I don't know why. I don't really know what the big gain at the end of the day is for them. I mean, everybody says, oh, it increases their money. The amount of money that Jackson County gets out of it is not very much. Whenever you look at your bill, I mean, a lot of that goes to the schools. And so there's just a lot of things here that have led to this. A couple of things that should change. Some things will likely change in the future regardless of what happens right now. But I feel like Jackson County needs to take responsibility for what they're doing. And if they believe so strongly in that everything is correct and what they're doing is correct, they should not need to hire consultants. They shouldn't need somebody else to do the assessments. They shouldn't need any of that. If they have the faith in themselves, which they seem to always have whenever they're talking in articles in the news, then put your money where your mouth is. That's my problem with it. And I mean, again, Tyler Technologies has always had a relationship with Jackson County. They've always been close. But there are some things that can change. And the current administration does not care. That's pretty clear. And if there is a new administration, it's going to be tough. I mean, how do you put the brakes on a reassessment that's already been done? I mean, that's another thing that's not talked about. But me being an insider, I know that you would not be going into an easy job. You would really have to handle the situation delicately. You have to really think of who is capable of handling that and who is not. With that said, this video is already way too long, and I apologize for that. You could get me to talk about my Jackson County years all the time for a long time. I'm going to go ahead and shut this off now. I appreciate you watching. I'm going to do another one of these soon. I'm sure I have a good topic set up, but stay tuned for more.